did the thing. I confessed with my mouth that he is Lord, and I believed in my heart, and I was saved. And so what happened in that moment? Why the weeping? Why the visceral reaction? Why is it like I'm talking about it right now and I feel a bit of a chill? It's like it was yesterday. And because what happened in that moment is I received an identity as his son. So as we read his words, I'd like us to hold two questions. This is a roadmap for the teaching today. I like to keep it simple, more so for me rather than you guys. But these are the two questions. One, is there a wrong way to do the right thing? That's one. And then the second one is, what happens when we keep secrets with God? Not from him, not keeping secrets from him, but what happens when we keep secrets with God, much like we would keep a secret with a best friend. And I'm going to start at verse 1, but I won't be reading every verse in order today, because the temptation of this teaching is to make it all about methods, like the method of prayer and the method of fasting and the method of giving. But Jesus is talking to us about motives. He's talking about why do we do the things we want to, why do we do the things that we do? And so I'd much rather look at the similarities that he's giving us on all these critiques. So follow my lead as we jump around a little bit. We'll get through it together. Let's begin with this first question. Is there a wrong way to do the right thing? What does he say? In chapter 6, verse 1, he says this, once again, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father in heaven. So whenever you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be applauded by people. Let's talk about the trumpet for a moment, because there's a couple possibilities that this trumpet could be. One is it could be hyperbole for the way that we say, like, oh, that dude's tooting his own horn, sounding a trumpet before everyone. Look at my good deeds. Another option is it was pretty common, some say, for a servant to follow a rabbi around with a shofar. And a shofar was a trumpet that was made out of a ram's horn. And anytime the rabbi would do a good deed, the servant would sound the trumpet. Look at him. But there's less evidence to that, and that's a little cloudy. The one that seems the most accurate to me is Jesus is talking about the way that Jewish individuals would give at synagogue. When you would enter into the temple, there was giving boxes, much like we have a giving box here in the back, but it looked a little different. They were called shofarats or shofar chests, because here's a photo of one. It looked like a trumpet, and it was often made of bronze or some type of fine stone. So picture this. You are a first century Jewish individual, and you're sitting in synagogue and waiting for the rabbi to get up and read Torah, and someone walks in and you hear a noise. Ting, ting, ta-ting, ting, ting. And you look back, oh, someone's here. You're sitting and waiting, and then you hear another noise, and this time it's louder, and it's like ting, ting, ta-ting, ting, 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 and you're like, whoa, like a really generous person just walked into synagogue. So if someone didn't, you could be careful about it, but if someone didn't want to be careful about it and make a noise with a handful of coins, they could. So no matter what the trumpet is, whether he's talking about an idiom here of tooting your own horn, or blowing a trumpet, or these shofar chests, we can be sure Jesus is saying, do not make an advertisement, a personal advertisement out of your giving. This is not for you. This should never be turned into announcements about yourself. And he's saying, yes, I know the temptation is there. How strange would that be? I don't know what the modern equivalent of that would be in our church, but if there was like a big flashing light next to the giving box every time you put it in there, that would be so weird, and you would just walk out, rightfully so. You'd be like, this is a terrible church. He goes on to mention prayer and fasting. He says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. And this word hypocrites here, when you render the Greek, it's more actor. Don't be like the actors, he's saying, because they love to pray standing in the synagogue and on the street corners to be seen by who? By people. To be seen by people. There's the motive. He goes on, he says when. Notice that he's saying when and not if. These are all when. We should. When you fast, don't be gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, so their fasting is obvious to people, the spectators. And it's interesting because prayer and fasting at its deepest level is a way of being with God. It is a intimate and deeply private offering to God. If you're like, I want to feel intimate with God, I want his presence, I want to be closer with him, prayer and fasting is a wonderful way to begin that. It's with him and never for others. I remember, or I should say, I'm really grateful that the first time I made a decision to be a Christian, when I prayed to Jesus and I said, you are Lord, was the first time simultaneously that I finally felt heard by God in my prayer. I was no longer talking to a wall for the first time. And I had an emotional reaction to that. I began to cry. I had a visceral reaction to that. I actually felt like something was coming out of me. I ran to a trash can feeling like I was going to puke, but that's a whole other sermon for another day, so I'm not going to get into it. And I did the thing. I confessed with my mouth that he is Lord, and I believed in my heart, and I was saved. And so what happened in that moment? Why the weeping? Why the visceral reaction? Why is it like I'm talking about it right now and I feel a bit of a chill? It's like it was yesterday. And because what happened in that moment is I received an identity as his son. I said yes to being adopted into sonship. That's what happened in that exchange. It doesn't get more intimate and personal than that. Another example, maybe some of you remember, in fact, I think we may have done this practice with some of you in the room, but we went through a fasting practice as a church. And so we would fast throughout the week, and then we would gather at the end of the week and discuss how is this fasting going. And that was helpful, and it was beautiful, but I will say it was not as helpful or as beautiful as the private conversations I had with Jesus as my stomach growled privately at work. That was the treasure of that experience. Reflecting on it's great. There's a lot to learn from reflection. But the moments I had with him, when I was looking at the growl in my stomach as a prayer to him and just saying, I offer my body to you as a living sacrifice, that was the treasure. I say this a lot in sermons, but Jesus is an expert in the human condition. So he knows what I am tempted to do with the spiritual disciplines.